one of the biggest, if not the biggest, public health problem that we face. And the reason is people are going to be living longer, living out their full lifespan, and age is the biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's.
Alzheimer's disease is the biggest unmet medical need we have in this country. At 85 years old, 40% of the population are already showing signs of dementia, mostly due to Alzheimer's disease.
The case and study of Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a degenerative brain disease associated in the dementia and neurodegenerative category. It is involved with higher thinking functions like memory, thinking, and emotional or personality. Alzheimer's usual effects begin after the age of 65. No one has a full understanding on what causes Alzheimer's, but there are things that can increase the risk. For example, family history of having the condition, increasing age, untreated depression, and lifestyle factors. All these factors can lead to Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is a disorder that cuts off the communication from one neuron to another, using the protein plaques as seen above. These protein plaques cause neurotangles, which are made from the protein tau, which then causes the cells to start fighting itself, which is also known as an autoimmune disease, causing instantaneous apoptosis, also known as cell death.
Greg's brain 15 to 20 years ago, what you would have been seeing is this accumulation of this little protein amyloid that become plaques. And as these accumulate, this amyloid causes the nerve cells in contact with it to make tangles, these twisted filaments of this protein called tau that accumulate inside the nerve cell and choke it from within. And so now the neuron is dying. What we believe is now happening is that as it dies, it spits that tangle out, and that tangle travels to a healthy nerve cell and starts to kill it by forming tangles. For decades, we argued about which pathology is more important, plaques or tangles. But what we've learned about that process now is that both the amyloid that's accumulating and the dying nerve cells cause a reaction in the brain called neuroinflammation. You have little cells in the brain called microglial cells that normally are trying to clean up all that amyloid as it's made. But if they see too much cell death, they switch from being housekeepers to being soldiers. They cause inflammation, they create free radicals, these little oxygen-based bullets that are killing nerve cells, and then this thing just keeps
In a person that has Alzheimer's, the brain begins to have fewer connective tissues and fewer nerve cells and connections. This is because of the neuron death, as seen in the video. This is why in the presentation Friday we saw brain shrunk, or the hippocampus to be exact, was shrunk, because the neurons become smaller and there's fewer connective tissue and nerve cells. Alzheimer's affects 1 in 10 people over the age of 65. From the case studies in America, an estimated 5.8 billion people have Alzheimer's. But Alzheimer's can have early onset cases, meaning people under the age of 65 have a chance of developing this neurological disorder. Once you obtain Alzheimer's, you cannot reverse the dementia effects or slow it down. You can temporarily relieve and help reduce the symptoms, but at the moment there is no full treatment plan to help with Alzheimer's. What are the symptoms of Alzheimer's? Alzheimer's has a lot of symptoms that show at different chronological points. The rate at which every patient develops symptoms is different depending on the person and lifestyle choices. Although, some things can make the symptoms worse, like infections, a stroke, and delirium. Generally, the symptoms of Alzheimer's are split up into 3 stages. The 3 stages involve the early stage, the middle stage, and the later stage. Here we're going to explore the early stage. In the early stages, memory lapse is the main symptom, but there are other symptoms as well, like mood changes, increased anxiety or agitation, and periods of confusion. Some examples include misplacing items, forgetting the names of places, repeatedly asking questions, and having trouble making decisions. Now let's explore the middle stage. The middle stage of Alzheimer's is characterized by memory problems getting worse and may develop other neurological problems involved with dementia, aphasia, and motor control. Someone in the middle stage may have trouble remembering the names of family members and have trouble remembering their appearance. Some of these symptoms include problems with speech or language, difficulty performing spatial distances, and increased confusion or disorientation. By this stage, people begin needing help to do everyday normal tasks. Finally, the later stage. By the later stage, memory loss has become severe and can become distressing to the people around or themselves. Some of the other symptoms that develop in this stage conclude of violence, fading cognitive skills, loss of appetite, and major personality changes. Where does Alzheimer's affect the brain? First, let's start with neurons. They're major players in the nervous system that help regulate the cell metabolism in the brain. Because of this, at first, Alzheimer's disorder begins by destroying the nerves and tissues in the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex that is involved with memory. It later affects other areas in the cortex, including the cerebral, which is heavily involved with language, reasoning, and social behavior. Eventually, other areas in the hippocampus are affected. This is why the symptom stages have different symptoms, like motor control, loss of vision, and loss in ability to speak. Eventually, the disorder destroys almost all of the neurons in the hippocampus until the person cannot function by themselves. This is why the brain and the hippocampus grow smaller quicker. What are some neuroscience techniques to recognize Alzheimer's? There are multiple techniques to find Alzheimer's disease. Some of them include in vivo neuroimaging, MRIs, MRSs, fMRIs, SPECT, and PET. In vivo neuroimaging is a newly promising technique to find Alzheimer's more quickly. Meanwhile, the MRI can help see subtle and early changes to the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex. The MRS can show the changes based on a cellular level based on the metabolites. The fMRI, SPECT, and PET all show further changes in the hippocampus and entorhinal cortex in order to diagnose somebody with Alzheimer's. What are some of the neuropsychology techniques? There are many neuropsychology tests that can be taken. They are Alzheimer's Disease Assessment Scale Cognitive, also known as ADAS-COG, the Short Bless Test, and the Clock Drawing Test. All are helpful in identifying if someone has the Alzheimer's disease or not. The Alzheimer's Disease Assessment Scale Cognitive Test contains 11 parts that take 30 to 45 minutes to complete. It is used to assess motor, language, memory, and functioning skills. Meanwhile, the Short Bless Test contains 6 items and evaluates orientation, registration, and attention. The Clock Drawing Test assesses visual impairments in order to see if they have developed any visual disorders. As well, they can be asked to remember the clock and draw it, which can be associated with memory. My case study. Mrs. J, a 69-year-old woman, began to show forgetfulness and early symptoms of Alzheimer's. During this year, she went in to get an MRI and noticed that the hippocampus was becoming smaller and decreasing in size. After, her memory problems embarrassed her until she had to leave work. Her husband shortly after started to notice her to become more irritable. At this time, she took multiple tests, which gave her a score out of 30. She first scored a 27 out of 30, which is almost above average. Yet a year later, she took it again and scored a 24. The year after this, her score decreased to a 20, and then finally it decreased to a 13. Scientists took this opportunity to look at what might have caused or increase the chance of her getting it. Living with Alzheimer's. Living with Alzheimer's is not fun, as seen in the video.
Today's our 24th wedding anniversary. We came from the airport straight for an Irish pint.
That's how it started.
How did I look?
You were grand.
Grand. Get on. We went and looked at rings, okay, but we didn't bother in the end. I don't think we could afford them, to be honest with you. I had gone for a scan. Doctor says 99% sure that I was carrying twins.
I was a bit shocked first, but then I said, this is great.
Happy graduation.
Happy anniversary.
New shoes, is it?
New shoes, still like yours.
Which one of the boys looks like your side?
Would be Robbie.
Joe has been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, so nearly 4 years down the line now.
It was just a big shock and kind of flattened me. It's hard on everybody, really.
Sometimes he doesn't know where the kitchen would be when he'd be upstairs. The challenge at the moment is trying to make sure he eats all the time at the right time, that he's dressed properly. He'll say, I feel terrible today, and, you know, this bloody disease, you know, I'm trying my best.
Is it cold outside?
Not too bad. In fact, he likes to discuss it rather than people not talking about it to him.
I have it and I have to work at it and fight it. And that's why I do all the kind of walking and all that kind of stuff. If I forget where I am, Boo will always get me home. Here.
He's putting up a fantastic fight, coming from himself, pushes himself all the time.
Because there's no point just lying down and